Welcome, my digital pathology trailblazers. And today's topic is regulatory aspects of AI and machine learning.
Learn about the newest digital pathology trends in science and industry, meet the most interesting people in the niche, and gain insights relevant to your own projects. Here is where pathology meets computer science. You are listening to the Digital Pathology Podcast with your host, Dr. Alexandra Zhurov.
We are on part 5 of our 7-part AI series. It means that we only have 2 left. Let's start. Regulatory aspects of AI and machine learning. This is a very polarizing, maybe it's not that polarizing, but it is very discussion sparking topic. So, and today it's a little bit text heavy. We don't have so many images because it's about regulatory. So, I mean, you can make it as engaging as it can be made, but it's regulatory. So some people are passionate about it and some are less passionate. Nevertheless, it is important because the adoption of AI in healthcare raises several concerns, and I even have exclamation mark here because it includes safety. So the concerns are safety, security, ethical biases, accountability, trust, economic impact, and environmental effects. It's a lot, like everything, right? The thing with AI and with heavy computation is that is new is that, well, maybe not, because medical devices you have to like somehow get rid of them as well, even if it's not software. But the environmental effects here are not negligible of the computation that is required for different AI tools. So that's why we want to discuss regional and global regulatory aspects of AI, including data privacy, software as a medical device, agency approval, and clearance pathways. This is going to be cool because then you're going to be like in the know on what it means that something is cleared, what it means that something is approved. And then we're going to talk about reimbursement and laboratory developed tests. Also something that was a hot topic last year when FDA said, oh, we're now going to take care of the lab developed tests and we're going to treat it as medical device. So in general, it is recommended that AI regulations are formulated by public bodies rather than profit-making private companies, right? Makes sense. But also often the public bodies, well, maybe not public bodies, but like associations have benefactors. So there's always a tie between the industry and the public bodies. There's always influences, right? Influences from everyone to everyone, but generally public bodies that are impartial. So, and an important fact is also that Gen AI, generative AI that produces stuff, requires different regulations than non-generative AI. And non-generative AI, the agencies or the regulatory bodies where already they have some frameworks in place, but not too many yet. So Gen AI will require different regulations, and the primary goal of these regulations is protecting patients. And there are different guidelines, different regulations that address that. So one of them is to protect patient privacy. And in the US, this is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, the HIPAA. So, is this HIPAA compliant? Is the software HIPAA compliant? Yes, it is. Then it means it protects patient privacy. And we also have GDPR, that's in Europe, General Data Protection Regulation. This is the regulation that is in play in Europe. And also there are rules regarding ethics. One of them is common rule. We're going to be talking about what that is. Common rule is to protect patients and subjects in clinical trials, and then this common rule is then being implemented or proposed, recognized by recognized ethics committees such as institutional review boards, IRBs. And of course, we have the agencies. We have the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administrations. So these are the three ways of protecting, like those regulation, privacy regulation, then the institutional review boards and agencies, for example, FDA. And we're going to be mentioning agencies from different places. So HIPAA and GDPR, they protect personal health information. And the common rule and IRBs protect human subjects in research and development, and FDA protects public health. So here in this paragraph, that's why I have the exclamation mark, is basically who does what in terms of regulating how research and biomedical research is done when humans are involved. And there was an executive order by President Biden when he was the president to establish a contemporary healthcare specific AI programs and policies. And what these policies were supposed to do, they would require agencies to increase algorithmic transparency, include human oversight. I'm a fan of this one. Well, of both. That is basically common sense. So thank you for making this an executive order. And when necessary, offer long-term safety and real-world performance monitoring so that we can ensure, or the who does that executive order, those who enact this executive order, or I guess the companies and the technologies and whoever creates these, ensures that these tools are fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe, right? We want that. That is common sense logic, and I'm glad it is now a mandate. So let's talk about data privacy and regulatory environment for AI and machine learning in healthcare. Regulatory is a topic with less images. So the healthcare organization that are using or co-developing those tools, when they have partners, they need to also ensure that those partners are compliant. So it's not that like, oh, I'm gonna hire somebody and it's not my problem anymore to develop something for me. If I am then like co-doing it, co-marketing, whatever, and I use a third party, it is my responsibility as an organization to make sure that they are compliant. They are HIPAA compliant or whatever compliant they need to be, right? Whatever regulation, whichever country you are, and whatever like the bucket of risk or the bucket of regulations you are in, you cannot just delegate and not care about it anymore. You are responsible, right? As we said, because the technologies are pretty popular, they have high potential, and they also raised moral, legal, and social concerns, right? Social concerns was like, okay, will those with resources only have access to that? Why? How can we make it more available? So in the world, there were around 40 jurisdictions noted or recorded by the Law Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. in 2023, 40 jurisdictions that specifically referred to AI. That's a lot. And, we have different organizations like United Nations, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, like different organizations that talk about this. And the regulatory frameworks necessary for approving devices in Europe are less rigorous than in the US. So it's easier to get software as a medical device approved in Europe. That's why many companies go to Europe first, get their approval, so-called CE mark, Conforme Européen, I think, and we have it in this paper later. But basically, often the strategy is like, oh, we go to Europe, the clearance approval is easier. We see how it works, we see how it benefits, we use the data, and then we go to the US and try to do it in the US as well. And regarding GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, it imposes restrictions on automated decision-making and, similar to many countries, limits the international transfer of personal data. So something specific to GDPR is this limitation of automated decision-making. So like not only for healthcare, right? In healthcare, you cannot do automated decisions about people, and not only without human oversight, and not only for healthcare. And obviously for healthcare we think, okay, the consequences would be, is basically patients health, patients safety, but also for things like financial decisions, insurance, right? You cannot just like feed the data to an algorithm and get the input, oh, this person is going to be insured or not, or this is going to be the insurance rate, if there's no human oversight. So this is not okay according to GDPR. And other countries also have regulations, right? China, Canada is mentioned, Australia. Obviously, these are just examples because there's a lot more countries in the world that probably have regulations. Most of them have some kind of regulations. So wherever you are using these tools, you need to figure out what the regulations are that you need to comply with. So now let's move to common rule and institutional review boards. This common rule is a federal policy for the protection of human subjects, and this regulation in the United States, common rule is the like a common name for this regulation, and it establishes the requirements for institutional review boards. So this regulation and institutional review boards need to comply with that regulation, and this is for protection of human subjects in biomedical research. So that's not specifically for a device, but if there is a trial, a clinical trial involved in a device clearance, or in clearance you don't need a clinical trial, and we're going to get to it, but in the approval process, then you do need to adhere to this common rule in the process of designing your studies. And then we have our FDA, our beloved agency, and other regulatory counterparts. So manufacturers of medical devices as a software, so it's a concept, it's a term, software as a medical device, this SAMD, because it's a medical device, but it's also software. And what is the definition? So this is a software intended to be used for medical purposes, but it's not part of actual hardware medical device. So like a scanner has software, right? There is software inside to generate the images and do whatever you need to do, stitch the tiles and or lines, but it is inside of hardware, right? So that's not going to be software as a medical device, even though software is part of this device. Software as a medical device is going to be an algorithm that you can deploy on so-called general purpose computing platforms. So smartphone, tablet, personal computer, all these algorithms that would help the medical decisions that you can deploy on something else than a dedicated medical device. So something that's going to be for clinical decision support tools, imaging, well, no, that would be a hardware. So, but image analysis device. So everything, image analysis software, right? That's going to be a medical device. Like if you have an algorithm that quantifies Ki-67, the proliferation marker, this algorithm is going to be software as a medical device, and it helps usually the image-based specialists. So the most image heavy are pathologists and radiologists, detect abnormalities in medical images. And yes, we do have an image. So how do you determine if this software functions as a device or not? You ask yourself a few questions, right? So, and if the answer is yes, it is a medical device. And if the answer is no, it's not a medical device. It can be used for educational purposes. So the question number one is going to be, does your software acquire, process, or analyze medical images, signals, or patterns? And if it does, then you go to software the software that functions as a medical device. Then question number 2 that you're going to ask yourself is, does your software display complex information that require interpretation from a professional? And again, yes, device. No, then it can be used for educational, something that is not a device. So then you don't have to go through the regulatory stuff that you have to do to get a device cleared or approved. And so that was question number 1. Question number 2, does your software provide a directive rather than recommendations, options, or information? So if there is recommendation, option, or information, then you're going to go to the educational or non-device. But if it's a directive, then you're gonna be a device and you need to comply with device regulations. And question number 4, does your software provide a recommendation without providing the basis for recommendation? Well, image analysis, like everything that has the black box or does not provide a recommendation, AI-based stuff, is gonna have yes as an answer, and it's gonna go to the device box. If the answer is no, so it will give you basis of this recommendation. And I'm seeing a potential for generative AI if it can explain why a recommendation was made. And maybe then it's not gonna have to be a device, but then you have a question, oh, but is the, like, can you believe this recommendation if it was generated by the same software that gives the recommendation? So that's, another discussion. And as you will see, there are not really any clear guidances for generative AI. And these are just my, loose thoughts when I think about it. But basically, long story short, if a lot is at stake when you use this software, then it is a device. If it's just to teach somebody and you can explain and everything, then it's not going to be a device. And something I was smiling when I read it was the FDA encourages good machine learning practices. I didn't know there was something like good machine learning practices. I know good laboratory practice, good manufacturing practice, the GLPs, GMPs, and basically GXPs. So now in the GXPs, I mean, it's not the same, but there is good machine learning practice. So they recommended to ensure that AI systems are transparent, explainable, and reliable. And how do you determine how those devices need to, like, what's the level of stringency when you develop a device? How much do you need to check it? So FDA categorizes medical devices, including software as medical device, based on level of risk to patients. And this concept of level of risk to patients, or in general level of risk when you use something, is gonna be showing up in different discussions, different AI discussions. So in Europe, there's a guidance for use of AI, and it's also based on risk stratification. Anyway, the risk stratification concept is going to be applied to many different validation frameworks. Like GLP validation relies on risk stratification. The categorization of medical devices relies on risk stratification. And like, how is it stratified for medical devices? It's going to be class 1, that is low risk, class 2, moderate risk, and class 3, high risk. And if you know which class are the scanners, let me know in the chat. Which class of medical device are the whole slide scanners? And speaking of whole slide scanners, and now back to regulatory. It's fun too. For some, it is fun. So what are the agencies in the world that regulate this other than FDA? Because, I mean, FDA is famous, but there are other agencies. So there's Health Canada, there is Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency in the UK. That's a long name. Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices Agency in Japan, National Medical Products Administration in China, Central Drug Standard Control Organization in India, and Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. And obviously, these are just examples because, as we said, there are more countries in the world than mentioned in this particular paper. And the mark, the European Union, as I told you, the mark, the CE mark stands for Conformité for medical devices. So if you see a device with a CE mark, it means it was cleared by the European agencies for use as a medical device. The bar, the scrutiny that these that the devices undergo in Europe is less than FDA. That's a fact. I checked this, double and triple checked this in several publications, and this is the case. That is also the reason why in Europe the adoption of digital pathology is higher, like a higher percentage of healthcare institutions actually adopted digital pathology. So yeah, and they say it is currently easier to get Conformité Européenne mark than FDA approval, and FDA clearance or approval is often a more lengthy and extensive process. So recently, I published a podcast with another digital pathology place sponsor, Hamamatsu, and together with a software company, Procia, they went and got the clearance for the scanner viewer software, concentric scanner, Hamamatsu scanner, and the concentric viewing platform. If you go to YouTube, you're gonna see the podcast or to the podcast. And they said it was a year of like the whole process, submitting stuff, and they had to prepare more than for a year. But definitely something that does not go fast. I wouldn't expect any like regulatory stuff to go fast or any legal stuff. So, and this is the fun part. Like, when is something cleared or when is something approved? I cannot say if it was cleared or approved, because then you will know what the class of the device was. Anyway, doesn't matter. You can still put it in the chat. But when you want to check if somebody knows what they're talking about in this clearance, approval, FDA acceptance pathway, you're going to ask them, oh, when was the scanner approved? When was, let's take Philips IntelliSight, the first one. When was it approved? And if they know what they're talking about, they're going to say, no, it wasn't approved. It was cleared. It was a clearance, right? So that tells you that it was a class 2 device. So because class 2 device gets a clearance and there are different pathways. So let's start with class 1. And we said that all this is risk-based. So this is low, this is mid, and this is high, right? So one low number is low risk. That's good. And what happened with the scanner, I think it actually was classified as a class 3 device, and then it was reclassified as class 2, and that's why it went this class 2 clearance pathway, right? When something is very new and it does not have a predicate device or is high risk, then it's going to go through this pathway, class 3, pre-market approval, and then approval. And then we have also alternate pathways, and the humanitarian device exemption. If there's a humanitarian crisis and then you want to use a device to alleviate the crisis, or there is something called the breakthrough device program where you can go faster. You get this breakthrough designation and you can go faster. So yeah, class 1, that's going to be like, I don't know, class 1. I don't know if gloves are medical device, but this type of like a syringe or something that you use like that. And class 2, for example, in the digital pathology space, that's going to be a scanner. What's going to be class 3? I don't know. I'll have to check that. What in our space would be a class 3 device? Yeah, maybe the algorithms would be class 3. Like, for example, I think Page, for their prostate thing, they went through an approval process. So that was class 3. And I will Google that for you right now so that I don't spread misinformation. Did Page AI get an FDA approval or clearance? I think approval. It says AI generated a clearance and approval. Class 3. So class 3. So that must have been an approval. So that's because, so, and also this class 3 definition is a decision being made about a patient's treatment or about the patient in general based on the output of this device. And in the scanner, they said, well, it's actually based on what the pathologist says about the output. And here in an algorithm, whenever you're quantifying something, or like this was also a computer aided diagnostics, so we're going to talk about it, but in general, like the distinction is, okay, is there a decision being made about a patient, diagnostic decision based on what's coming out of the device? But based off what's coming out of the device, like, is this giving information for the diagnosis? And for the scanner, they said actually interpretation comes first, so this is just generating an image. So yeah, we have here a little bit of clarification of this what FDA does when they approve or when they clear stuff, right? So manufacturer, and here we are talking about, what are we talking about exactly? Approach to software as a medical device. Yeah, so we have pathways for medical device approval by the FDA. It's going to be pre-market approval, pre-market notification 510K, 510K exempt, de novo classification, and humanitarian device exemption. So manufacturers may request de novo classification if their device is novel, so there is no predicate, no similar device. When there is a similar device, you can show that your device is non-inferior to the one that is already cleared, and then you go the 510K path. And so, but if there is no device, and that what's happened when Philips was doing the clearance of their pathology solution, which was the scanner, not only the scanner, like the whole workflow. This was there wasn't any before, so they went through everything, and then the next one, I think that was Leica, said, hey, Philips already did that, so we're very non-inferior to Philips, so let's go and do 510K. And in the United States, the humanitarian device exemption is employed when a medical device is used for patients with rare condition, so less than 8,000 people have a condition, then you can have the humanitarian device exemption that we had here, right here on the image. And we also have this breakthrough device program can be used to expedite what you're doing. And I think Paige got the breakthrough designation as well. When FDA says, oh no, we have to have it fast, so go fast and do this breakthrough pathway because we need it for patients. When we look at the stringency, pre-market approval is the most stringent type of device, and this goes for class 3 devices, and that involves non-clinical and clinical studies, and then FDA approves the device. So if something is approved, it's class 3 and it went through this pre-market approval. Then we have the clearance. So the words are approval and clearance. If you want to have a bucket word, I would say FDA accepted, but that's my invention. The word is not my invention, but that's like a bucket word that I would use if I didn't know if something was cleared or approved. I would say accepted by the FDA. And 510K clearance is a pre-market submission made to the FDA to demonstrate that device, including software as a medical device, is at least as safe and effective as another legally marketed device, similar device, right? So one scanner is showing, oh, I'm as good as the other scanner. And the word used here is non-inferior. And the regulatory speech, it's going to be non-inferior. And what they need to show is that they actually are like the other device, and they have to show transparency about the data used for training and validation. This is important. Also, any foreseeable risks associated with the AI machine learning software as a medical device within routine operations, right? And there were other programs, some are discontinued. So there was a concept being explored, and that was between 2017 and 2022, where FDA thought, oh, it's going to be more streamlined if we don't do this device by device, but if we go and do it by company. So if a company follows good what was it, machine learning practices and all good practices, then maybe they can get like some kind of blanket clearance. It was discontinued. This was called the pre-certification program, pre-cert program, that was between 2017 and 2022. And then also there is something called predetermined change control plan. And this is supposed to be a structured report that outlines how changes to a software product, such as updates and enhancements, because software, we know it regularly gets updated, right? So do you need to go with every update to the FDA and do the same exercise that you already did for the whole thing in the first place? Well, not always. Sometimes you have to, and FDA has rules for that. But basically, this predetermined change control plan includes the types of changes that can be implemented without requirements for additional regulatory review, right? So this is, and along with the process for evaluating and documenting these changes. So documentation is a big deal. And also it specifies, okay, what's the threshold where you actually have to go to the regulatory agency and do a new pre-market submission, right? So there is a definition of a threshold. If so and so much changes, or if something happens, then you actually have to go again. So now let's talk about money. Meaning, let's talk about reimbursement. But what is not free is healthcare in the US. And that's why reimbursement is important. And there are reimbursement. What are the issues, reimbursement issues for AI and machine learning in healthcare? I guess they're no different than other reimbursement issues for other stuff, but this is new, so you have to fight for this reimbursement again. So to secure reimbursement, manufacturers in all countries need to demonstrate the clinical and economic value of their technology. And it's difficult. How do I know that it's difficult? Have I done it? No. But you know who has done it? My husband. So he's an MD, clinical pathologist, and he used to work for a company that had, I think they had a lab developed test. And he was basically for, I don't know, 3 years or 4 years or even 5 years, they were like fighting, had this major initiative to get it into different healthcare guidelines and get this test reimbursed, or at least like recommended, so that you can even think about reimbursement. And then at the end they said, no, thank you, it's no, we're not going to reimburse it. So yeah, it was difficult. I actually once drove him to some of those, what is this, like those assemblies of those people who review this stuff. We went to Baltimore and he was presenting this, and then in the end, after 5 years, they said no. So it's difficult. Let's not underestimate the difficulty of getting reimbursement. But if you demonstrate the clinical and economic value, then there's hope. Let's call it hope. Maybe even a chance. And of course, there's an acronym, ABHS. So algorithm-based healthcare services. And it can be different types of algorithms, right? In terms of digital pathology, I am thinking about, okay, image analysis, quantification of something, highlighting something, but it can be an algorithm that takes into consideration different type of biomarkers, risk stratification, and things like that. So those algorithm-based healthcare services, if they use AI to answer clinical questions, or AI that streamlines operational tasks, and they use AI or machine learning to produce clinical outputs for the diagnosis and or treatment of a patient condition. And it's difficult to get reimbursement for this because the traditional way of doing this is fee for service, like fee for service systems. And there are no specific billing codes for the algorithm-based healthcare services. The recently is maybe 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago, codes were, I don't know if like introduced or invented for digital pathology. And the codes didn't go with any reimbursement. People were just asked to use the codes to show how much of this particular service is being used. And I don't know what's the plan to actually like get codes to reimburse digital pathology, but I know it was a very cumbersome process, and I think there is a DPA, Digital Pathology Association, webinar on this. But yeah, so it's valuable, those systems, those ABHS services. There is a growing recognition of the value of them, but they are new. They're like, they don't fit in the existing framework, so you cannot just like plug and get a code. You have to figure out how to do this, and the regulators are also working on it. For example, Medicare Payment Advisory Committee released a 30-page report, and I have a special news for you. We're gonna go through this report in this live stream. Not at all, don't worry. That was a maybe not so funny joke, but when I thought about it, I'm like, that's something I am never reading. So the fee for service doesn't work. There would have to be a value-based payment model, like extra payment for better patient outcomes. And I'm like, how? Like, if there's, that's biology. Like, if there is good biology, I mean, outcomes, like in terms of like treatment outcomes or whatever. But I read this and I'm like, so those who will get healthy, they're gonna get their money back, and those who don't get healthy will not. So a lot of discussions. And in short, the software reimbursement strategies remain underdeveloped. I love this sentence, so I have it in red here. Yeah, it's difficult. It's not, there's no framework that you can put your software as a medical device in. And yeah, the lack of standardized frameworks, and that's a problem, right? So let's talk about another hot topic, the LDTs, laboratory developed tests and artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms. So when was that? They will tell us here. In 2024, FDA published new regulations that explicitly place LDTs within the medical device regulatory framework. It used to be like a alternate path if you wanted, or if you had something that was a good test, but there was no option, or you didn't want to go through the medical device route, or it was just in one lab, you could do the lab developed test. You still can do it, but an FDA is going to look at it. So that was a hot topic last year. Caused a lot of dilemmas. If you see words in red, I like them for one or other reason, for some reason, dilemmas. So yeah, I love dilemmas in the regulatory space. And then there's going to be more dilemmas, because we need to think about regulating generative AI, right? So that's going to be more dilemmas, because Gen AI is a totally different beast. So what are these unique challenges? Reproducibility, right? It's not going to be the same input always gives you the same output. It's prompts, it's talking, like talking to a person. Well, maybe I'm going to give you the same answer every time you ask me what my name is, but actually not even that, because in Poland, I'm going to tell you a different thing than in the US or in Spain, because people in Spain would call me Ale. Whereas in Poland, everybody calls me Ola. And in the US and Germany and other countries, they call me Alex. For you, I'm probably Dr. Alex. So not even that will give you the same answer, even though the question is, what's your name? So the same problem with reproducibility is for generative AI, and those models are dynamic, non-deterministic, and they, like we said, software as a medical device doesn't fit into the regulatory framework. This like totally doesn't fit. Gen AI doesn't fit. And even though ChatGPT was released in 2022, we are in 2025 right now. There is nothing that is guiding this, and it will require, it's work in progress. There are already tools out there, but those tools are like assistant tools rather than diagnostic tools. So there is a lot of work going on, helping pathologists to be more efficient, better doctors for patients, faster doctors for patients, to get patients the diagnosis faster, but more of, okay, assisted by AI. So there's no determination made by AI. Different companies are doing that, and I'm going to show you some of them. at USCAP. There's going to be videos and vlogs, and if you've seen any of my conference content, you will see that as well. Yeah, so it's going to be a challenge. It is a challenge. Software as a medical device is a challenge, but also the current regulatory frameworks assume a level of predictability and consistency that generative AI cannot always guarantee. So we need the development of adaptive regulatory standards. Were these already developed? No. That's what we need. The paragraph of our modern pathology papers is always like the outlook into the future. So that's what's needed. Whenever there is a black box, and whenever we have deep learning, there is a black box, then we face the problem of explainability, obviously accountability, bias mitigation, and potential misuse. And next week, we're going to be talking about the ethics. So I know that regulatory might not be so a lot of people, but I think ethics and like using it in a way that's fair, that's just, is going to spark a lot of discussions. The same issues for Gen AI as any type of AI, like data privacy, security issues, copyright infringement, intellectual property rights. And there is currently no separate regulatory review process dedicated just for AI-based tools. So you will see some lists of, so many tools are AI-based. I think I was showing a list at some point with like hundreds of radiology, cardiology, and other AI-based tool, and there were like 3 tools for pathology, and only 1 tool was image-based. So work in progress. Things to remember from today's live stream is going to be this medical device classification, class 1, 2, 3, and which paths they go through, and also what makes a software a device, because if it's a device, then it has to go through the regulatory pathways. And before you go, if you don't have my book, get the book. There's the book. It's going to be updated. The AI, so this is the free digital copy, and whoever has the digital copy, so if you don't want to buy the physical book, it's okay, because it's going to be updated soon. It's on Amazon right now, but this is going to take you to the virtual copy that is free. If you're not on my list yet, get on my list, because then you're going to get the recording of this particular live stream and all the other things that are happening in the digital pathology space. And if you are here, you are a true digital pathology trailblazers. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your attention, and I talk to you in the next episode.